I have to be selective on the fandoms I get into. Strap in, you're about to learn way more about me than you probably ever thought you would. Cheers. So, with today's video, I thought I would talk a little bit about my experience of being a fangirl. I got inspired by this generally because I was thinking about my time on the internet, but the other thing was recently one of my friends had asked me, oh, do you watch House of the Dragon? My response was immediately, no, I watch the memes instead. I have just always really been much more involved with fan culture than actually fandoms. Like, I grew up initially being really involved in fandoms and everything, but I much prefer the fan culture typically around it, which I know is kind of weird because there's always those comments about fans being obsessive and crazy. And again, I talked about parasocial relationships beforehand, but also, especially for myself with fan culture, I only care about the IPs really. Occasionally the actors, but also with the actors, for example, or actresses, there is a very definite line. I'm like, I like them as this. And because I like them as this, maybe I'll check out their other roles and maybe I'll follow them on social media. But I'm not gonna read things like real person fanfics. That they're a real person. That just feels gross in my opinion. It feels too parasocial. And believe me, did I have crushes on actors? Yes. But also as I got older, I'm like, no, there is a line. Maybe I can make those stories in my head, but that's never happening in real life. Like, as I'm talking about this fan culture stuff, I love consuming it. I very rarely do make anything with it. Periodically I will. Like, I have written fanfics, especially in high school and portions of college. A lot of my textbook notes would have like little fan fictions in them, or it'll come up specifically with my own OCs for a lot of different fandoms. That's something I have done probably since I was about 11, and I did this a lot because it helps me fall asleep. So I'll make up these stories, and I'm not one to come up with my whole world, but if I use a world that's already existing and then insert my OC in there and just go off and have adventures, I love that. I definitely have done that with Star Wars. I've done that with like Harry Potter, and there's a lot of them, and I'm now blanking on them, but I used to like even draw out the characters that were all looked like me because it was putting me in that story. And sorry not sorry about that one. I was so much of a Mary Sue, not writing it, but I just would think it. But yes, I have written fan fictions. Do not go find them.
They're really bad because I didn't have a beta. Didn't even know that was a thing until later.
It was also just my creative outlet was just writing fan fictions, whether or not it's like with Doctor Who. That one was just me being a companion, actually. That one I do look upon fondly because it was used to get feelings out that I'd had. But there's just so much with it, and I have been involved in fandom stuff really since I was very young. I've always get obsessed with like intellectual properties quite quickly. I've heard stories from my grandmother talking about how she hates Mulan, not because it's a bad movie, but because I insisted on watching it over and over again on VHS. Yeah, my cousin's kid, who is about like 9 years younger than me, oh my gosh, my grandparents were so much happier watching just the Wiggles over and over again than watching Mulan. Which is definitely saying something of just how obsessive I got with that.
I am kind of surprised. I didn't wear out any of the tapes actually.
I remember kind of my first fandom was the Beatles. We had the one CD, which was all of their singles, and I listened to it non-stop. I just kind of took it over. Granted, that is kind of a habit of mine, especially growing up, is if I found something in the house that I liked, it was mine, much to my siblings' chagrin, and also my parents, actually, too. I started to love the Beatles a lot, and I really did always like George. Like, the Young Photos of George were some of my favorites, because, like, that CD had one of those packets, because, again, this was back in the day, and I just thought George was the cutest. And that Beatle fandom kind of ebbed and flowed. And later on, as I got a little bit older, what actually happened was, this was again in about 2010, you could find full like Disney movies on YouTube where it was just in like parts, like 10-minute parts. And so that really reinvigorated my love of Disney. And because of that, I ended up finding all these fan edits where they would take trailers and people would like Photoshop or do other video editing, like green screen work to different animations and put them to trailers. I loved watching that stuff to see how creative it was, or putting it with music. And then also some fan art like this stuff. I think I'm hopefully going to be able to find the fan art that really first actually introduced me to DeviantArt, where it was these like Disney families and you got to like kind of learn these stories. And editing Obi here, just want to jump in about this one artist. So I do not know if that is the correct artist that I linked in the Instagram. There was another name that I'll put right here. That seems to be the actual like original artist. I do not know if that is the same as the Instagram artist. The artist also deleted their DeviantArt a while back, but some people had re-uploaded it with the correct name. Other people had not, and this was before the original artist had deleted their stuff, so they were like, take this down, this is my work. So I don't know what's going on here, but that's just generally what I found. Once I learned DeviantArt, I think it kind of went all downhill from there. I briefly touched on it in my video about being chronically online, and yeah, DeviantArt, there are these groups that were like Disney kids, and I just got obsessed with it, reading the different fanfics, looking at the different like character ideas of the different children, and I just kind of wanted to make my own. And that kind of was like the first introduction to the online fan space, really. And that stuck around for quite a while. There was like other fandoms I got into briefly, things like I really watched a lot of Charmed one summer. There was a period of time where I really got into things like Being Human. I watched like the first 2 seasons, or maybe just 1 season in a day, because it was on a like marathon on Sci-Fi and one of the days I had off from school. And so I'd make up little stories with both of those actually. I just really, did I actually write it all out and post it on the internet? No, partially because I was a little afraid. I didn't have my own computer at that point. I think I still had a flip phone where I was not allowed to text. So like, yeah, I was working on what I had. But a will find a way. When I was in 8th grade, specifically a senior in, or not senior in high school, it was 8th grade. I was 14, almost, I just turned 14. God, ages are all over the place right now. The high school stuff comes in later. But I was in 8th grade and I discovered the Beatles movies, like specifically Help, like right there. Do not watch it. It's like really racist, actually. I rewatched it in college and I was like, oh my word. But I learned that the Beatles had a movie because my mom had the records, because both my parents are also very much into geeky culture. My mother is more on that obsessive, like she will read everything from one author, like she will love things deeply. My dad was a Trekkie back in the 80s. His big one is Next Gen, and that's what I grew up on. And like he remembers watching Doctor Who on PBS, and yes, he has a specific doctor, obviously the 4th Doctor. He's a boomer man, like of course it's going to be the 4th Doctor. And also he's a boomer man in the United States. I feel like if he was a boomer like in the UK, that's a little bit more like iffy on which one, but in the US, when he was watching this in the 80s, like I really again got into Beatles and became much more obsessed with it, was writing all these stories like I had mentioned before of like time travel so I could go back and like live out the stories I'd wanted to. That was also the time where I was introduced to Nerdfighteria, which is an online community I very much love, and the kind of like, I guess calling almost like a tree roots, like spreading out after I discovered Crash Course into Vlogbrothers, into people like Charlie Is So Cool, like Carrie Hope Fletcher, Dan Howell, Phil Lester, all of that. And I know what you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, you must have really been on the Tumblr scene. Surprisingly, no. At that same time, I did actually have a like friend who was really into Tumblr, and just the story she was telling scared me a lot. I was a very sheltered kid, and like a lot of the stuff she'd said was a lot of the more 18 plus stuff, and I just did not feel comfortable with that. I stayed on my DeviantArt little corner, specifically with DeviantArt. That's where I was reading a lot of Beatles fan fiction. Again, I mentioned that earlier, that was where I kind of was introduced to my first ever spicy stories. I also was finding things that were like long stories. The one that hopefully, again, I can hopefully find it. It was called That Boy, and that one was that author, and there was two others, three actually, kind of, who all had locking stories of these different women dating the Beatles. Yes, I'm serious. The only one that didn't have a girl was John, because yeah, online spaces really hate Yoko and just figure out ways to keep John with Cynthia. And I think about that, and those fan fictions were weird, but I also got really involved. I showed up to school multiple times really upset because I did not like where that chapter had ended, and I was like, is she dead? Like, that's literally how I was feeling on things. But yeah, so I was really involved with that. That's also when I was really discovering things like Wattpad and Quovitin, and just, again, those stories and consuming it. Did I ever actually publish? No, because maybe I didn't feel like my work was good enough, or I could never get a full plot in. I just loved the exposition. There was never any long drawn out conflict. It was only just small scenes and not full stories. And I just was there to enjoy the artwork that was made. That was the big thing when I finally got onto Instagram. That was introducing me to so many different fan artists. Again, the stuff I was seeing on DeviantArt too. I would read everything I could, or consume all art that I could of any of the fandoms I liked. Like, again, Beatles. There was some Loki stuff early on when the first Thor movie came out, and of course Jack Frost. Oh my god, Jack Frost. Also, I don't know if any of y'all know Studio Killers. Their song Jenny, like, I'm showing up some of their stuff, was like really popular a couple of years back on TikTok. I remember when their stuff had come out because I was reading things like Scandinavia in the World, which makes me obnoxious when my sister mentions things about Scandinavia, and I'm like, well, from what I learned from a Danish person in my high school years. But yeah, I just kept on consuming it, and especially once I got into high school, being a fangirl became a big part of my identity. And it didn't really matter what fandom I was in. I just liked consuming everything that fans would make. And of course, I would make my own stuff. There's, like I mentioned, the Doctor Who fanfic that I wrote because we had to do writing stuff in junior year English, and I used that to get my emotions out because I was annoyed with dance and everything, and I just came up with silly stories about things, and just kind of putting myself in historical events that I really thought were interesting. That just kind of kept on going. The Beatles aspect of my identity was a big one. I guess it was really December 2015, January 2016 was when everything kind of shifted for me. By that point, Star Wars The Force Awakens had come out. On the horizon was Captain America Civil War. And I had just watched the Graham Norton episode that was for Days of Future Past. This one, where the meme of longest interview ever. There's a clip on the Graham Norton show. If I can find it, I'll put it somewhere wherever the cards are, of the James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender reacting to fanfic. And that just kind of started me on a whole new aspect of fanfiction. With the Star Wars, I kind of liked Kylo Ren, but I wasn't huge. But the thing that got me was then thinking about Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so I was reading any sort of preferences that I could find on DeviantArt and Wattpad. And I slowly ended up doing things with Quovitin. And it was the same thing with the X-Men specifically, that reboot with James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. Specifically because of James McAvoy. I mean, come on. He's James McAvoy. He was also Mr. Tumnus. I did really like the Chronicles of Narnia. I had stories also for that one too, but never with Mr. Tumnus, surprisingly. Actually, it was Peter, but because everybody was so into Edmund, I'm I can't also be into Edmund, even though arguably on a fanfiction level, Edmund is the fanfiction favorite. I definitely see that a lot, where it's the golden boy, sure, great, he's cute, but you'll never find enough work on cute golden boy. It has to be slightly tortured brunette, i.e. Bucky, Edmund. I guess we'll go with Amond, even though he's blonde, but you get what I mean. Like, tortured younger brother, or not younger, because Bucky's not younger than Steve, but you get what I mean. Like, the one that kind of seems like a war criminal, that one we can excuse. Like, that's the one we love, and that's where you'll find much more, because also I think it makes us feel different. Yeah, I will not be like, oh, I'm an expert on fandom. I just, like, I know stuff. Like I said, I did not go onto Tumblr, but I know enough things. I watch enough Strange Eons. I have been on the internet enough to know how a good chunk of fan spaces work. That's one of those things where I'd seen the Swell Entertainment talking about fan communities, and I'm like, yeah, these kids are just new to this. I've been doing this for years. As I said, I had gotten into reading so much more fan fiction, especially when it came to Obi-Wan Kenobi and like Charles Xavier. So that finally landed me at AO3. As everybody kind of talks about, you never initially start at an AO3, but you find yourself there. And I think that was kind of one of the two places it was really over. It was a combination of that, and I was discovering fan fictions with also then Marvel, because Civil War had come out, and my mom one day was like, let's go watch it. And I was hooked. I was much more of a Steve. I'd always been into Steve once I got to college, and I had run out of Steve fics that I wanted to read on both like AO3 and Tumblr. Like, because I go onto Tumblr occasionally, mostly to look up for fan fictions, and no, I didn't go on there for Jack Frost, really, now that I think about it. Also, please note, I'm thinking about this from like 12 years ago. So, like, yeah. But I think about that, and that's where I got into Bucky. I was not a Bucky person. It was not the movies that got me into Bucky. It was the fan culture that made me really fall in love with Bucky, because he only, at the time, had maybe like 47 minutes. I think that was what it was when it, like, how much screen time he had had over the course of multiple movies. Had like 47 minutes. But the fans had run with it and had come up with these great stories about him that, like, he was a blank space. He was a character that you generally had the looks of, and you can go from there. And also, I want to point out also with some of my experience in the fan space, I just am thinking about this now as in thinking about, like, I wrote Avengers fanfic, and that's actually published. Please don't look it up. But because I'd been in some of the older fan spaces, I very much was aware of the Anne Rice cease and desists, or like court cases. I think it was just cease and desist, where she had sent cease and desists to people who had written Interview with a Vampire fanfics. And so the very strict, I do not own anything, and also because I was in the Disney fandom, and Disney is so strict about their IPs, everybody's like, yes, this was a character based off of a Disney thing, we do not own the likeness, etc., etc. So I'm very much familiar with that kind of sphere that it doesn't seem that most of fan culture is as aware with now. But yes, so with kind of being introduced to AO3, that was, I'm not going to say it's the beginning or the end, but it definitely opened up to more, because I had not really been in things like Super Wholock. Did I watch Doctor Who? Yes. Have I gone to Doctor Who conventions? Yes. Have I gotten stuck in an elevator with Osgood? Yes, although we weren't stuck in an elevator. We were just both in an elevator at the same time. Did I also watch Sherlock? Yes, but actually only 2 episodes, and it was when it was season 1. I watched the 2nd and the 3rd episode. No, I still have yet to watch the 1st episode of Sherlock all the way through. I, by that point, was starting to learn fan culture, and as it proliferated through, I've read Alpha, Beta, Omega Dynamics stories. Those are kind of fun. I read The Nanny because of, not The Nanny. The Nanny is also written by Laura Ferguson, but I read The Fake Mate because it was ABO. Although coming from the Avengers fandom where we had a lot of like fanon, ABO also had, I guess, its own fanon because there was no shapeshifting. I've got critiques about that. And the other thing with like fan culture is I ended up on Instagram, and it was Instagram and YouTube, I think, was where I had ended up like consuming just people analyzing works. It started with things like in game theory and film theory, things with like Five Nights at Freddy's for game theory, and My Hero Academia actually for film theory. And so that got me into My Hero Academia, trying to learn more. I was watching, I think, Cartoon Federator also at the time, and they were talking about My Hero Academia. So I've only watched one episode, but my god, do I A, know a lot about the characters, and B, have I consumed a decent amount of fanfic of like Aizawa and All Might. I don't do the students, like no, that's too gross. And I was again reading the cartoons, like I'll try to show some of the ones that I have read with showing also their like usernames, because you got to show off your artist. And so those were just like, I preferred that honestly. And it's really been the same thing with like Game of Thrones. Of course, like I said, I watch the memes. I also watch people like Lucifer Means Lightbringer, Alt Shift X, and I'm now blanking on the names of the people on TikTok I watch who really go in depth, because they're the ones, in my opinion, that really build up the fandom. Like, you will start off with these like possibly really great world building, or in the case of J.K. Rowling, really bad world building, but you'll have these other creators build upon it, think upon those worlds, and explain or come up with scenarios. Like, let's be honest, Marauders in the Harry Potter fandom is long surpassed anything J.K. Rowling has done. I have not really consumed a lot of it, but I do know of a lot of fanon and some other people who, again, take fan culture and analyze it so beautifully, and I just want to consume it more. So I may never watch anything from that original IP, but I do learn about it a lot, and I just like through them, and I get really invested in it. So yes, with the Game of Thrones stuff, I've been consuming a lot of that stuff even before season 8 of like Game of Thrones, and periodically since then I will just rewatch things like Lucifer is Lightbringer, which he's here on YouTube. I'll tag his channel or a video of his somewhere up here. Those are great ones for like learning about just like the world that George R.R. Martin has created, because he is a science fiction author and he builds these amazing universes. And I just, of the fandoms, I think the only one I need to get into is anything Terry Pratchett, honestly, but also I don't have the time. I have to be selective on the fandoms I get into. So that's really all I've been thinking about. So like, yeah, I can prefer to just consume fan culture than the IP, because as the joke was when Endgame came out, the fan fictions will fix everything, and believe me, they do. I still think and wish for an Avengers where everybody just lives in the tower all happy, like Clint's just climbing through the vents, Thor's got his Pop-Tarts, and like, I don't know, Tony just perpetually calls Loki reindeer games. I'm like, I wish for those days. Those are the days where I was really enjoying fan culture, and I think about those days fondly, and I wish for those back. Instead, I have to go to other fandoms to kind of get that like good, quick fanfics. I'm much more of a one-shot girly. I occasionally will read longer ones, but honestly though, I don't have the time, and I don't have the like heartache to put up with a slow burn anymore. I am not 14, and heck, even again with those longer forms that I was reading when I was 14, they were finished. I hope that was kind of a fun like story into my experience with fan culture. It was kind of rambly. I did have notes and everything ready, but I just kind of went for it because I get excited talking about fan culture. But also, again, I am not new to this space. I have been a fan of and consumed things fully for a long time, and I've been on the internet fan spaces, honestly, probably since I was about 13, and I'm 26 now, so it's been a hot minute for me. It's been half of my life. thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!